Well, hello everybody. I'm John Atack, and this is my dear friend Hoyt Richards. Hello, Hoyt.
Hello, John. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and to all and sundry near and far.
Yes.
So, as ever, you have been thoughtful, and there is a topic that you would like to broach. How about
Yeah.
you kick us off with that?
Well, thank you. And yeah, I've been thinking about it because obviously I've been involved in the cult survivor community for more than a couple decades now. And
Hmm?
I know you've been involved even longer than that.
1,000 years now, yeah.
Yes, is that what
Since
it is?
Egypt.
Yeah, well, you're chipping away at that billion-year contract. That's good.
Guys, I
Right.
read the Book of Thoth in 2000 BC, and I've been working on it ever since.
So I was thinking, an unfortunate thing I've noticed over the years is that in the cult survivor community, various organizations try to emerge to kind of give support to other survivors and to provide kind of forums where people can kind of hopefully interact and connect and
Mm.
feel safe. And more often than not, a lot of times the behavior that ends up emerging in the leadership of certain organizations that claim to be doing this starts to mirror the exact behavior that we as survivors are trying to get away from.
Yes.
And a lot of kind of rampant egotism and control and flat out abuse even occurs sometimes. And
Mm.
it's just extraordinary to me that in this community where we're all trying to not only bring awareness and educate, hopefully, not only other survivors, but just the general public, that very often these organizations fall into that same trap of the very thing we're trying to point out that had caused so many problems for so many. So I was kind of curious. I know you've had some experiences that way, and I thought it'd be something that we could discuss. Like, why do we think that kind of happens and what brings that on and how conditioned are we just because of an experience to kind of repeat some of the same errors of our ways when you would think we would know better.
You would hope we would know better, yeah. It's such a complicated problem that there's, of course, a lot of unhealed hurt. Quite
Yeah,
simply that. Um,
yeah.
then you have the kind of uh, the cult training, and cults tend towards creating selfish people. Let's
Mm,
get away from psychiatric terminology for once.
right,
That cults are about being self-centered, and but they're also about making sure that the leader's more important than you are. And
right.
you get these hierarchies where people think they're important. And then you have the actual in-house training. In Scientology, I think one of the most shocking things I've ever witnessed was while I was still involved, uh, I hired a guy who had been the commanding officer of St. Hill, and he'd worked for Ron Hubbard as a Ron Hubbard aide, so he had an incredibly high reputation. And he was on a leave of absence from the Sea organization. And so I hired him in my little artists agency. And one week, my wife, or I should say my partner, she was later to become my wife. She was meant to sell paintings and she hadn't sold anything all week.
Right.
And he took her into this tiny little room, this kind of 6 foot by 9 foot room, stood up face to face with her and started screaming at her. And he told her that she was worthless, that she was trying to destroy me, that she was, all of this. And I kind of hovered outside the door listening to this and kind of went, this must be some technique I don't know about. This doesn't sound right to me. I didn't see him again for 3 days. And by that time, I decided I had, no matter that he was personally trained by L. Ron Hubbard, the grand poobah, I had to say, why did you do that? And in Scientology, Hubbard said this thing: if it isn't written, it isn't true. So there must be a record of things. He also said
Really?
telephones are psychotic; they have no memory. But could be. But so I said to him, where's it written that you do this? And he started crying. He put his head in his hands And he said, it's not written anywhere. So I said, well, in that case, why did you do it? You know, in Scientology, policy, procedure always has to be written down so it can be consulted. And he said, it's because it's what Ron Hubbard did to us. And that
Wow.
was the first time I'd been involved in Scientology for 8 years or something. That was the first time that somebody had come clean about Hubbard's personal behavior. I would later interview so many people who were subjected to these screaming tirades where they were traumatized and they would, you know, it could last for years. I met one guy who had locked himself away for 20 years. He'd not left the house in 20 years because of a Hubbard attack on him. And, you know,
Right.
and because Hubbard said, you're a suppressive person, you're just trying to destroy everybody. And you go, well, if Ron says that, it must be true. So this is called, I hadn't heard the expression before, a severe reality adjustment. And anybody who has been in the slave sea organization will have had
Mm.
this applied to them. And it's awfully demeaning.
Yeah.
It's psychologically destructive and it's catching. Once you've been in an environment where that's happening every day, when it's happening all around you, it becomes normal, becomes the way you behave. And that bullying, domineering urge that many of us have, you know, I admit it,
Mm.
I have it.
Right.
Um, you know, I hope I've not expressed it very much in my life, but
Right.
I am aware that you know we can feel a kind of pleasure in feeling superior in dominating another person, and
Right.
for me that's an odious and dreadful thing. But I recognise that anybody who's you know articulate and forthright can
Right.
can go too far that way. So those kind of behaviours come out, and also if somebody hasn't gone through a healing process where they've understood how these techniques work, and that this is the thing that just shocks me, how
Mm.
few people want to understand what the processes and procedures of their group were. With transcendental meditation, they've only got a couple of techniques. You know, you chant the name of a demon or deity, which you're not meant to reveal to anybody, and over and over till you start getting trippy and dizzy. That's the one technique, and the other one is you know where you hop and pretend
Right.
you're flying. So
Right.
you know that's fine. Scientology, you've got more than 2,000 techniques currently in use, and thousands more that have been abandoned along the way. And to get down into what they are doing, why they seem to work, how they produce euphoria, which is the really important thing to understand, and how they turn somebody into a junkie who's got to have more of it and can't really see that their life hasn't improved, their relationships haven't improved. They might be making more money because they're better at bullying people, but that's not
Right.
really the you know the road
Yeah.
to total freedom as far as I'm concerned. So, and I've recently started thinking about the Kubler-Ross and the stages of grieving, and it rankles with me. It seems a really simplistic way to look at things, but I hate to admit that the first stage is denial. It's not
Mm.
happened to me. I don't have that disease. My
Right.
friend hasn't died. You know, I wasn't in a cult. I was never a victim. All of these parts of denial. They didn't take me in. I had a friend, Shiona Foxness, who was an absolutely wonderful person. And she made $1 million in business. And, you know, she was exuberant and lovely. And I loved her dearly. And she told me one day, she said that she'd never really believed in Scientology. And so I looked at her
No.
and I said, so Shiona, you took your 8-year-old child to Los Angeles, a foreign, you know, she was Scottish, to a foreign
Right.
country. You put her into the care of people who are completely untrained, into a gaggle of wild children. You worked a 90-hour week. You ate very poorly. And and she was right at the top of the organization. You got about $30 a week. What would you have done if you had believed?
Hmm.
So that denial, that protecting ourselves from
Right.
the cognitive dissonance of saying, I was taken in. And then
Yeah.
the next step with Scientology is understanding, and this is terrifying to Scientologists because of the phobia that's been induced, but understanding that when Ron Hubbard said, and he did say it, to be a good Scientologist, you have to understand hypnotism. None of them do. None of them
Mm.
do. They just say, oh, well, it's not hypnotism. You go, well, what is hypnotism? It's guided imagination. It's persuading people that there are fourth and fifth invader forces on Mars and Venus, and this is a
Right,
prison planet, and you've got
right,
engrams and all of this. It it's getting somebody into an imaginarium and then controlling their perception of reality. Until you've broken through that, and the next stage, of course, for Kubler-Ross is anger. Oh yes, and look at it out there. Look at the ferocious battles that are being fought out there between former members who are upset with each other and losing focus. You know,
right,
I got involved with the Aftermath Foundation for a few months last year because I wanted to be sure that it persisted because it helps people escape from Scientology.
right.
But I'm also on good terms with Aaron Smith Levin, despite all of the noise that's going on around, which I do understand. Aaron has helped people to escape from Scientology.
Mm.
I'm focused on that. If
Right,
something criminal or awful happens, I'd like to help and calm it down. And I've really, really gone out of my way to do that in the last 15 months. But those, then you start getting that there are people whose sole focus is to attack other ex-members,
right,
that they're not really doing anything to heal themselves. They're not doing anything to make the society aware of the real dangers of a cult group, and you know how cults function. And you and I have spent far too much time thinking about that. And I've tried to explain that in my book, Opening Our Minds, to say this is how it functions throughout our society. You know, not just in religious or therapeutic or commercial cults, but in politics, in
yeah.
education, you know, wherever we go. And there is just such incredible reluctance to take that on board. So, yeah, that's more than 5 cents worth, isn't it? That was about
Yeah, well,
$10 worth, you know. But
well, yeah, you raised so many great points, and I think one of the inherent challenges within someone who's working through their own survival process is to, I guess, learn I don't know if you would call it a technique or a point of view where you feel you can vet another person how much they've worked on that healing process. You know, like how much have they dug into exactly the things that you kind of addressing the and you and I have talked about this many times, the humility it takes to admit to yourself that you got conned on and taken on some level, that you got manipulated, that
I'm not as clever as I thought I
yeah,
was.
exactly. That's a huge obstacle for people, and so it's like I'm trying to wonder how anyone coming through an experience like that, how do you develop the point of view where you feel like you can um, recognize that in someone else? I mean, the logical thing to me says if you haven't done the work yourself, then it may be harder to recognize that someone else has done that work. So I think a lot of it is, you could say, is on the individual as far as you have to kind of work your way through that process of recognizing that, what happened and just being honest to yourself about it. And as you said, go through and learn the techniques that were used on you to understand not only how it happened and why they were doing it, but also to forgive yourself, to recognize that if you're just receptive, because of a kind of a what I would call a bait and switch, you've bought into some idea that you think this group or this person's going to enlighten you to the information that's going to somehow make you become more self-realized, whatever the pitch may be with the group. So that, the truth is, when it comes to kind of mind control techniques, the most key factor is being receptive. So if you're showing receptivity to that, then unfortunately mind control just works on everyone, uh, if you are receptive. But if you don't understand those techniques and you don't understand how it happens and how effective they are, then it's very hard to forgive yourself, because you're not really diving into what really happened. And I think because of that, a lot of the behavior that I've certainly seen exhibited, and I can only, as we can say with any kind of behavior, I can only recognize it because I'm sure I'm capable of it in my own way. But it's tyrannical behavior, is what it is. That's a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. That bullying, and I know in my group, Eternal Values, basically you couldn't move up the food chain if you didn't exhibit tyrannical behavior.
Yep.
Like that was, obviously it wasn't called that, but that type of behavior, looking back on it, was exactly the type of behavior that was exemplified and strived for and complimented. And that was the thing that people, if you figured it out, that was the way to rise in the organization. And
Yeah.
I mean, and so I think it's really challenging when you're trying to come through this and you're trying to understand what you've gone through and how it happened and what the lessons learned are. Um, and like you said, there's so much unhealed hurt
Mm.
that I think the big advantage is to take on that mantle to try to heal through education and forgiveness of yourself by that education. That education of learning how these techniques work, learning how aspects of manipulation and control and mind control, all these type of things play into the experience we had, allows you to then say, okay, um, this is I thought I was getting involved with something positive. I now realize it had a lot of destructive qualities, and I fell for it, but it did teach me a lot. That
Mm.
to me is the silver lining to this whole thing. You can embrace the kind of mantle of, yes, I got conned or manipulated or taken, whatever way you want to frame it, and recognize that that whole process is a way to actually learn and be educated, not only about yourself, but the world we live in, because of these techniques or certainly these behaviors are seen globally. And certainly, whether you want to look at politics, whether you want to look at advertising, military, I mean, all these techniques are used in different ways. And I think the more we know about them, the better off we are. But if we don't do that work, then we potentially can get involved with personalities that claim to be doing something positive, even within the kind of cult survivor community, and can display the exact same behaviors that we experienced in the cult, because maybe they haven't done that work for themselves and now are falling back on just what they learned.
And often there is no work done. It's just a matter of saying, you know, I had a terrible time in this group, and I think this group is dangerous. And so I want to expose this group so that people won't be harmed by it. Now, there's, a narrative that is the commonplace in the counter cult
Right.
world. And
Right.
it's a positive narrative until you start looking at the details. Um, that for some people, they're getting revenge.
Right.
They think that by yeah, I told this story many times. A wonderful guy, Carlos Cornier, who's a documentary maker and also the conga player in Funkadesi, if you're ever in
Right.
Chicago. Barack Obama's favorite band. Um, but he was in the Sea Organization, I think, for 10 years. And he was down in Florida. And he was on what is called the Rehabilitation Project Force, what used to be called a concentration camp in other places, or the Gulag, which is a way of demeaning people, humiliating people into total subservience. That's the idea of it. You could spend 2 years, 3 years, even more on this
And
thing. Wait,
is it framed that way? Like they're open about that being the
no,
objective?
no, you're being rehabilitated.
All right. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay.
So
Right.
you're not allowed to originate communication. You can't speak unless spoken to. You have to wear black so that everybody will know that you're a member of this. In
Oh,
Clearwater, Florida, where he was, you're not allowed a mattress to sleep on. you eat table scraps. In my book, Let's Sell These People a Piece of Blue Sky, there's an instance from testimony where a guy found a palmetto bug in the table scraps. So you are demeaned and humiliated in ways. I can only think that Ron Hubbard had read Robert J. Lifton's work on brainwashing in communist China and set about applying it.
Right.
So he's on this thing. He's at the lowest ebb. You know, you've been reduced to being what Scientology calls a degraded being until such time as you completely capitulate any self-control. You give over your direction. You have to obey orders immediately. You'll be the people cleaning the toilets and doing all of the grunt work.
Yeah.
So he's been doing this, and he's somewhat dejected, as you can imagine. And you have to run between your jobs as well. And he's running from one job to another. And there's a protest in Clearwater at what they call the Flag land base. And a protester with placard spits at him. And that is the attitude that we really have to be careful about. You know, hate the sin, but love the sinner. Well, I don't know about loving the sinner, but there's no point hating them. Understanding that everybody is caught up in some way in a belief system or a genetic predisposition that leads them to behave in a certain way. I have never hated L. Ron Hubbard. I've very much, I wept when I heard he died in 1986 because I wanted to visit him in prison, which is where he should have been, and see if there was any redemption for such a man who had blighted so many tens of thousands of lives with his ridiculous promises. And his, this is a man who left $648 million, all of it, every penny of it, taken from Scientologists. And when his crew, when he was making films in the late 1970s, when he felt disappointed by his crew, he took away their right to have toilet paper. $648 million, a 24-track recording studio, a full-scale race, horse racing track, Aberdeen Angus bulls, black swans. This is the way he lived. And he takes away toilet paper from the people who are working quite often an 18-hour day. I mean, I talked with a woman who reckons she got 2 hours sleep a night.
Right.
So you've got people who are being demeaned and so going after them, blaming them, even when it comes to the current martinet, the tyrant of Scientology, David Miscavige. He was 13 when he, was dumped into Scientology. His father was a lovely man. I have an interview with him on my channel, Ronnie Miscavige.
Right.
But David Miscavige is an uneducated Philadelphia street tough who was given power, who achieved power, who bullied his way to power. Hubbard didn't make him his heir. He usurped power. And now he drinks Blue Mountain coffee. And, when Concorde was around, he used to fly in Concorde and put all of his executive staff for 8 years into a double trailer, the whole. So, but still, if David Miscavige is watching this, and I hope, David, you are, give me a call. We'll see if we can sort out your problems. I'm not here to destroy anybody. I don't think it's a good idea. I do think that psychopaths and people who are antisocial should be restrained from harming others. But I don't believe that they should be punished. I don't believe they should be hurt or treated badly. And the question, reflect on that. I'm sorry, because I'm just going to, me, I'm just going to keep
No, it's great because the one of the things that you raised that really resonated with me is this idea of kind of the replacing the new mission. When you get involved with any sort of group, there's always kind of a mission statement or a purpose, or and that's one of the things that's so seductive about getting involved with a cult.
We're going to save humanity.
Yeah, it's exactly. You find this grand purpose, right? And it's usually on a massive, global scale. It's grandiose, and it's all these, and it's some of these things I explain to people. When you've bought into something like that, the awakening that you bought into something that wasn't real, and in essence, very often a lie, is not only devastating, but the psychological crash from thinking you were going to have this vital role in this grandiose scheme that was going to affect world history on some level, as delusional as that is, it's very tough for the psyche to say, oh, so none of that was true. So what am I going to flip burgers at McDonald's now? Like, how am I ever going to get excited about anything in life again?
Yeah.
Like that's this psychological crash that you go through, which is really hard to process. And very often, a trap that people can fall into, and I know I fell into it initially, and I would consider it as maybe even a stage of the recovery process of the first inclination is to replace that purpose with, well, if my purpose isn't here to save the world, I'm going to at least save the world from the bad group that I was involved with. And that's my new thing. And you end up exhibiting the exact same behavior that you were doing in the cult, but now addressing it back at the cult. And you have not really healed much yourself on, well, how did my personal psyche come out of this experience, and where are those wounds that maybe I should address first, potentially, rather than take on some new mission of thinking I now need to take down this terrible thing that I was involved with. And that's not to say that the narrative that you described, like the idea of, oh, now that I've awakened, now that I've seen this is bad, I want people to know about this so that they won't fall prey to their bad behavior. Like, sure, that is a great narrative, but if you haven't really processed and healed your own wounds that you endured through that experience, then you potentially fall prey to exactly the same behavior that you were taught in the group as, was exemplary, and the thing that you're striving for. Now you did that same thing back towards the group, and you may not have healed much in the process. And I think that's where the trap lies, right? Because
Yeah, I think so.
it will feel good and it will feel familiar, but it's actually not potentially helping you in the way that, yeah, well, how are you really feeling? How do you process those choices that you made, albeit under influence, whatever way you want to frame it, but you're still responsible for everything you said, everything you did. And I know for me, some of the things that are more difficult to live with are the things I didn't say or the things I didn't do to when I was watching behavior going on that I knew, even in my incredibly brainwashed state, I knew it was wrong. Like to just not do anything, it was something that really didn't, as when I reflect back on, really doesn't sit well with me because it was the inaction that was almost more painful to recognize I chose rather than even some of the things as hurtful as I might have said to family and friends over the years. Sometimes that inactivity and that inaction was really the thing that I've had to work hard on to take ownership of and process and look at what it taught me.
Well, I for nearly 30 years felt guilty that I had not stopped this Scientology executive from giving a severe reality adjustment to my partner. And we married, we had a couple of kids, we separated 30 years ago. And I said to her, crikey, so it's like more than 40 years ago this thing happened. I said to her one day, I'm really sorry that I let you down there and I didn't intervene. And she looked at me and she said, I don't remember it. So I'd carried all of this guilt
Right.
all of this time. But
Right.
I I think serious problem with cultic, an aspect of that makes something a cult, a dangerous cult, is the sense of superiority, the sense that you are one of the elect, that you understand the world better than other people, that you apart from the leader, who obviously is the person who understands it best of all, and that leads to a diminution of compassion. It
Mhm.
means that, and certainly in Scientology, this is very deliberately worked out, that the only mention of compassion is the word sympathy, which is considered to be a bad thing in Scientology. You do not express sympathy. So if you grow up as a child in Scientology with Scientologist parents, then
Mhm.
and you hurt yourself, you fall over and graze your knee. Nobody will say they're there. No, nobody will comfort you. And I think that that carries on into adulthood. I think that that has an effect in that you you don't know how to soothe people. You don't know how to calm situations down and make things better. And you've been in a system that if you were born into it, you're not taught compassion as a virtue. You're not
Yeah.
taught to think about other human beings as all having value. It'll only
Right.
be, the members of your group that really have value. And the rest of them are all going to hell, by the way. So
Right.
and they've had
Right.
their chance, they've had their chance. They could have joined us and they didn't, so they're all going to hell. So compassion, then if you join a group like Scientology, then compassion will be eroded. I spoke to a guy called Otto Rose, who was one of only 5 people trained to the highest level of Scientology, the Class 12 auditor, by Ron Hubbard himself.
Right.
He was the only person before 1988 to do the highest level of Scientology processing, operating Thetan Section 8. He did it in 1971. He was the guinea pig. So he'd gone to the highest level. Although he'd been thrown out, he was Hubbard's auditor. He was the guy that was looking at, all of Hubbard's written folders of all the things he'd
Right.
done. And he made the mistake of pointing out there was a particular type of e-meter read called a rock slam. And there were about 200 of them in Ron Hubbard's folders that he'd counted up. And he made the mistake of telling Hubbard this. Now, these denote evil purposes, according to Hubbard.
Oh
And
boy.
so he found himself standing on the dock somewhere in North Africa or something with, his passport and $5. But when I met him 12 years later, he was still covertly working for Scientology, for their Guardian's office, he told me, even though they wouldn't let him back in. And he still absolutely believed in all of this. But the one significant realization he'd come to was Scientology erodes compassion. It makes you selfish and uncaring about other people.
Right.
And so the
Right.
agenda becomes, how famous am I? How celebrated am I? How much adulation can I get from people? And the sort of nonsense that we attach to narcissistic
Yeah.
behaviors. And there is no humility left. So without addressing that, without actually going, am I doing this to help people? I've been called an anti-Scientologist many
Right.
times, and I've said, no, I'm the only pro-Scientologist in the world. Everything I have done, everything I've suffered and risked, decades of harassment has been, and don't have any money in the bank.
Hmm.
I'm retired now and I don't have any
Right.
money. I don't have a cult following, despite what I know about how to manipulate people.
Right.
I've done it because I want to help Scientologists to understand Scientology, and then they can make their own mind up about whether they want to, keep performing these rituals that keep them high, but make them nasty people, make them bad, selfish people.
Yeah.
For the most part, not in every case, but yeah. So, and then humility is the other side of the coin of invulnerability, and the easiest people to con and manipulate are people who know they're invulnerable,
Right.
and it
Yeah.
is, my understanding of my own gullibility that occasionally protects me, not always, sadly.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that you're to me hitting the head on is it's an ego issue, largely, usually, right? I mean, it's so much of the indoctrination process is one that appeals to your ego, that you're finding out about this because you're special. We're coming after you on some level, maybe because we you're chosen, or we're recognizing, qualities in you, like we know better, and we can see that the abilities you have, and the potential you have, and all these sort of things that when you don't recognize that that's a technique, sound fantastic getting those compliments. Look, we see your potential, we see your uniqueness, your awesomeness, whatever way that they're going to tell it. Like, we get you. And I think there's such I don't care about, probably how healthy you appear at your family life to grow up. We all have certain vulnerabilities, in the sense that, I don't care how many times their parents might, if they did, tell you how much they love you. getting it from any other place is always something that's very appealing. Someone just immediately thinking you're being seen, thinking you're being heard, and that people get you and see you and love you. All of that is so seductive, and it sounds it's like hardwiring, heroin. Not that I've ever done that, but I mean that idea of like, oh my God, I found my people. I found someone who gets me, and and if you don't know that's a technique, it's incredibly powerful. And because that's the indoctrination process, when you're coming through a recovery, if you don't acknowledge how much your own ego played into you getting involved in this thing, and that obviously is the way you develop the humility, that's the way you develop the compassion, all these traits that, to me, I think the beautiful opportunity of having lived through a cultic experience is the recovery process of acknowledging how it happened that potentially could teach you a ton of what is a common term, emotional intelligence. Like if you dive into why that happened, where you were vulnerable, why you were vulnerable, the techniques used and the words used and the appeal to your ego and how that played such a huge part, and then that gives you potentially not only to learn about those things, learn about yourself, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of safeguard of knowing, oh, when I get into these situations or I have these sort of feelings, that potentially it's my ego that's responding. It's not necessarily that's going to be something that per se may actually benefit me in the long run, just because it's a short-term high or kind of that, as Yuval talks about, the awe, right? And so it's I think that's the part that you really start seeing emerge even in the cult survivor community, that people that start to even rise, their ego starts, that label of being called an expert, or having overcome your demons and now you're in this place and now people listen to you, can be a real trap. It can be all this ego stuff coming up again, and you can end up exhibiting, as you said, kind of opening this whole piece, a lot of that behavior that was the very thing that caused you all the pain when you were in that group and having, been submitted to it. And I think that's it's tragic and ironic, but it's something that needs to be, talked about and addressed, because unfortunately it happens too often.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the term expert is, yesterday I read a news piece which mentioned somebody I know and called him an expert.
Right.
And that's not my view of this person. He is somebody who survived a cultic experience, who is intelligent, and who has not completed the journey to understanding what happened to him. And
Right.
while people are agitated and angry, and they have every reason to be agitated and angry, some of the horrors, some of the awful things that have been done by groups, um, let's just throw something into the mix. I met a woman who was on the Rehabilitation Project Force, the slave group within the slave group, and she fell pregnant. And for 2 weeks, she was screamed at to have an abortion. Tremendous pressure. This is absolute commonplace in Scientology. Hundreds and hundreds of women have been, maybe thousands, have been forced to have abortions because of a policy laid in by David Miscavige, which continues a policy laid in by Ron Hubbard. Because, hey, children stop people from producing. They stop people from working. So for 2 weeks,
And they shift people's priorities. Like
save the
you,
planet.
you can't be selfish if you've got a little thing that's a little one that's depending on you, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can't.
And who needs more people? They're terrible things anyway. Um, so she's yelled at for 2 weeks in a prison environment because she's locked in. She can't go out anywhere. And when she refuses to have a termination, she and another pregnant woman are taken to a cesspit which has human excrement in it. And they are to shovel this into wheelbarrows and move it into another pit. Pregnant women being exposed to human excrement. This isn't a fairy story. This is something that happened. And it's one, they're the testimony of former members, sworn
Right.
testimony. We have the stupid sociologist Brian Wilson at Oxford, who put forward this amazing dictum that you can't believe what former cult members say. So we are a group who are to be excluded, who are not to be allowed to have an opinion. And you're going, well, why would you believe, as he did, what people are in the group say? Well, in his case, it was because he was paid by Scientology and then he was harassed by Scientology. And he declared them a religion. He's the guy that the idea of the new religious movement comes from. But so we're not meant to have a voice and we're not to be trusted. Well, actually use the same methods you use in any gathering of evidence. Are there documents? How many witnesses are there? How viable is witness testimony? And having talked now with more than 1,000 Scientologists, I have a pretty good idea of what happens in Scientology. And having listened to hundreds of Hubbard lectures and read all of his published Scientology books and much beyond, I have a pretty good idea. But if you go and look at the Oxford University Press's book, Scientology, edited by James Lewis, I mentioned once my name is misspelled, even though I wrote the only history of this movement. I mentioned once my name is misspelled, and a paragraph is cited from me, which was something I posted on social media. Because the guy writing that particular essay says, oh, well, Scientology doesn't like us to quote from its secret teachings, OT3, the thing that was South Park had such fun with. This Scientologists actually believe this. Xeno and the body thetan, 75 million years ago, all of the inhabitants of 176 planets crushed in volcanoes, which didn't exist at the time.
Anyone who hasn't seen it has to watch that. Yes.
So it's great. It's great work. It's art. But they cite my one paragraph description of this lunatic thing, and the last sentence is humbly tendered as a gift to mankind. Now, these experts writing a book for the Oxford University Press don't recognize that that's a Hubbard quotation. They make it look like I'm an idiot, which to some extent I suppose I am, because I'm, humbly tendered as a gift to mankind. It's what Hubbard said when he released OT3. So you have people who are experts in the academic field who really, I wrote a paper about Benjamin Zeller at Lakeside in Chicago, an associate professor, because he'd seen the flyer advertising our friend Steve Hassan's Cult of Trump and written a paper about the flyer advertising it. He hadn't read the book. And so I wrote a paper, which is it's on my website. It's on Janja Lelich's, on Steve Hassan's website as well. But so we've got these experts over here, and Zeller says that he's an expert on Scientology. He's not been willing to talk to me, for some reason. People who get the date of Hubbard's death wrong. James Lewis in the Scientology book gives the wrong year for Hubbard's death. That's how precise the scholarship is. People who haven't understood the experience and have just taken it secondhand from current members and said, well, they seem to be fine. They're making lots of money and so everything's good. They don't dig into it. Then on the other side, you've got experts who are family members. And sometimes they do become experts. Priscilla Coates in the Cult Awareness Network, or Cynthia Kisser, they became experts. They knew what they were talking about, in my experience. But many are so upset that they've got a family member in a group that they're there to attack the group for that reason. And there's a lot of fury involved. Or you've got the unhealed hurt of the former member, which is until you've come to the point where you get that you are 99.9% the same as every other human being genetically. You're not, you obviously are different, you're special, but for most of to realize I'm the same as everybody else. There are some things I can do better. There are some things I can't do as well. I am not superior to other people. I am not inferior to other people. And the beginning to me of being grown up, of being mature, is having compassion for other people and even for psychopaths. But let's lock them up. Let's put little Hannibal Lecter masks on them,
Right, right.
and you know, let's
Yeah,
stop that. But until you have compassion for other people, you should not. It's like, think about it in medicine. If you don't like people, if you think
right,
people are scum, then you're not probably going to be a very good nurse. If you need to have some fellow
right.
feeling, you need to have some concern for others. Until that's developed, I think it's best to keep quiet.
Yeah. No, and I think if you haven't done that, then you potentially could exhibit some of that bullying behavior that we're talking about. And I think those are the things that, if you're coming through your kind of recovery process, and you're encountering other survivors in some of these organizations, and you're at all starting to get those feelings of being pushed around or controlled or bullied, unfortunately, those things do happen, and those things are important to recognize. Just because someone is claiming that they're in this community doesn't mean they're impervious to exhibiting that type of behavior. And
Far from it.
exactly. So I think that's where it's really important to kind of acknowledge it when you feel it, and not fall into the trap of, because of the perception that this person's in a maybe a position of any authority, I guess you would even say, because they're considered a leader or an expert or whatever, that potentially that behavior could be there. And it's unfortunate that it still emerges even in the very community that we're trying to frown upon those type of things. And I think it's something that I'm glad we can talk about, because I think not talking about it is not acknowledging just it's like you're saying, we're not all that different. We all fall prey to certain egotistical moments when we feel insecure, and we can exhibit that type of behavior that none of us are proud of being able to behave that way. And that we just have to kind of be vigilant, not only with ourselves to try not to behave that, but also be cognizant that others will behave that way, and we should be apt to say that's not okay, and call it out to whatever degree is possible, and not accept it, just because of some perceived position that this person may have, in some organization. And I think that's, something that is an unfortunate but true reality within our community.
Yeah, and I mean, a method that's been recommended by many therapists for decades is the take five. That if somebody is coming at you hard, if somebody
Right,
is behaving badly, you have the right to say, "I don't wish to communicate with you at the moment,"
right,
and that's an end to it. No more words. We're done. I'm going to take five.
yeah,
Um, and as yeah, it doesn't matter. Even when, even if we do grow up, there will be moments where we snap. There will be moments where we're not as pleasant as we might be. So understanding in ourselves that we should take five at the point
yeah,
where we're raising our voice at somebody, unless it's stopping them from running under a bus or something. But
right,
start
yeah,
shouting, you're no longer in control. And the other thing is, of course, there are a lot of entrained behaviors that come. If you're in Scientology, then you'll be taught to repeat a question in the same words until it's answered. And you do the little, the training routines where you go, do fish swim, over and over and over again. And this becomes an ingrained response. You're taught to acknowledge a communication from another person. So you say, right, good, thank you, fine, one of these, to say, I heard what you were saying. And according to Hubbard, I duplicated what you were saying, which is an interesting thought. I'm not a Xerox machine. Um, but and taking those behaviors and saying these are entrained, you're taught this is the way to be. Is that
right,
the right way to behave? Now, I happen to think the acknowledgement can be very useful, letting somebody know that you got what they said. But I've also seen it used by Scientologists so that they will persuade somebody that they agree with them when they don't. So somebody will say something and they'll go, okay. And the person will go away thinking they've been agreed with. And the Scientologist will say, no, I just acknowledged that I heard you. You know, I wasn't
Right.
saying what you said was okay. I was saying I heard you. But looking at, you know, there are so many in Scientology. If you hurt yourself, if you knock yourself against something, you touch the the place that you bumped yourself on. This is called a locational assist, and you'll find people doing that. I've found ex-members, a couple of some friends who had kids, and years after leaving Scientology, if their children got into a fight, they sit them down on chairs facing each other and tell them to do training routine 0, where you're silent and look in the other person's eyes and don't move. And he went, well, yeah, that may not be the best way to resolve. You know, you might calm somebody's cortisol, hydrocortisone reaction
Right.
down a little bit by doing this. Deep breathing is probably more useful, and putting them in different rooms, you know, while they gather themselves together. So many of the concepts persist, you know, and until you, that's the part of it that you just don't seem to see that often in counseling for former members, of saying, is it true? You know,
Right.
is reality really an agreement that we're all making, as Ron Hubbard says? If you increase communication, will you always increase liking or affinity? Well, no, because if you shout at somebody, they won't like you more. If you
Right.
shoot somebody, and Hubbard did say bullets to our communication, they won't feel better. These ideas will persist. And some of those ideas in Scientology, this idea of being at cause, you know, you're
Mhm.
the one in charge. That's, you know, you've got intention, you've got infinite control, 8C, you've got tone 40 intention. This whole idea that you can somehow have a force of mind that will make other people comply with you, which usually does end up as shouting rather than having, you know, magical powers of
And,
intention.
and it's all ego based, right? It's
Yep.
all you like you're going to have these great powers, you're going to be able to influence people, you're going to, it's all ego stuff. And listen, and that's not to say there aren't certain areas where the ego can be incredibly useful, you know, to create some ambition, to get us off our butts to kind of do things. But that kind of uh, filter where it's all about you becoming better than them and and showing up someone, you know, you've got some secret knowledge that you're now going to be able to take advantage or you know, all these sort of things to, you know, all under it's all power, right? It's all about like it's almost like inheriting, you know, you're buying in the idea that you're going to have some secret powers you're going to be able to wield like a superhero, and that's just all ego stuff, and it's not ultimately serving anyone who's really, as we're talking about, really trying to communicate with someone. You want to hopefully create some sort of feeling where we're on the same level. We can just talk.
Mhm.
That's true communication where I'm not having to jockey and position myself to somehow win or to feel better that I'm somehow better than you at the end of this conversation. I mean, it should be hopefully we can exchange information and hopefully both learn and both feel gratified for the opportunity to share those words that somehow served ourselves to maybe teach us something we wouldn't have if we hadn't had that conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like you know the jockeying and the power and all that stuff is also tied to ego stuff that you know and that's what's challenging about any organization, right? Because inherently there's a structure where there's usually some sort of hierarchy, and to move up, there is the association that moving up in an organization gives you more responsibility and therefore potentially more power. And
Mhm.
you have to be vigilant to say, well, it's not about the power. It's just about I'm taking on the responsibility on some level because I believe in this so-called cause and I want to do what I can to contribute, but not make it about that ego stuff. And that's where I think and I say this myself, it's easily a trap, you know.
And yeah, I agree. And to some extent, we misattribute the problem. The problem is this cult. No, the problem is the behavior. The problem is the
Right,
beliefs. The
right,
problem is authoritarianism. So, which, as I've pointed out elsewhere, authoritarianism has DOMs and subs. the DOMs are the people who believe they're gods, know everything, and should tell us what to do. And the subs are the people who are going, well, I'll believe that because they're smarter than me. I, you know, this the concept that there are predators, DOMs, and subs, prey, which has been put forward by a man who today has taken office in the United States.
Right.
It's been openly said, I disagree with that view. I don't think that we are divided simply into predators and prey. I think that to be human is to realize that we don't have to be DOMs or subs. We can actually collaborate with each other, and bring the talents we have together. And if I'm talking to somebody, I'm not seeking to dissuade them of a belief. I'm seeking to help them examine their beliefs. And the conclusion they come to, it's like when I used to talk directly with Scientologists, and it's 30 years since I last did an intervention, per se. But when I used to do that, I would have to explain to whoever had hired me that my interest was not getting the person out of Scientology. My interest was offering them a choice to reconsider their involvement by giving them better information than they already had. What I want to see is not somebody who's going, oh, Jon, you're right. And of course I am right, but it's not somebody, pandering to my ego or trying to adopt my, let's face it, ridiculous view of the world. It's somebody reaching out to their own conclusion. It's like seeing a baby walking for the first time, where somebody says, no, this is what I think. I've come to this decision. I think that Ron Hubbard was unpleasant, or whatever. But they've come to something that they realize, rather than just parroting things. And part of the problem, it used to freak me out in Scientology that everything was explained by Scientologists in the terms that Hubbard had used. So if you were going to explain, it would be the hypnotist touches his tie. This is from Dianetics, the mental science of modern health, still in there. The hypnotist touches his tie, and the subject takes his coat off and says, it's warm in here. The hypnotist touches his tie, and the subject puts his coat on and says, it's cold in here. Now, or the little fish swimming in the brackish water that they will actually take these bits of Hubbard wisdom and repeat them. They won't come to a new way of looking at it, their own metaphor, their own, or anything from their own experience. They'll parrot it. That's not good. We need people to think for themselves, and arrive at that point. And then they become really interesting when people have, actually gone. And it's not a matter of them being academic or intellectual or any of that nonsense. It's a matter of them being authentic, that their thoughts belong to them, not to me, not to Ron Hubbard, not to eternal values or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. No, and I think that really is, I think any type of intervention opportunity is just hoping to encourage someone to think for themselves again, and and I really have believed and encountered that when you give the person the information, and if they choose to take it in on whatever way they do, where it kind of reactivates that critical thinking, more often than not, the person will pull them out of that situation. They'll pull themselves out of that situation. That's what you're hoping to do, rather than point out the flaws of this group and that's wrong and what I'm saying is right. It's really about, no, you've got to figure out for yourself really what worked for you. But right now, potentially, you're not thinking for yourself. And that's what needs to be addressed. And here's some information that will hopefully help you acknowledge that maybe currently that is the situation you're in, and that there's a way out, which is really to kind of just start thinking for yourself and be, as you say, be authentic. And I think that's really what it's about. And it's the same when you're going through your recovery process, that you have to continually look at your situation, your way of how you got yourself in this situation, be able to understand it enough to be able to forgive yourself on some level, and necessarily don't harbor such resentment about the people who indoctrinated you, because very often they're also indoctrinated. And so it's not about saying you're bad. It's like, if anything, hopefully having some compassion to say, well, thankfully I figured it out so where I can start to think for myself. And these people that are still involved, they're still indoctrinated.
Yeah.
How tragic is that?
Mhm.
Uh, and have definitely some more compassion involved with it, the whole process.
Absolutely. And of course, it's worth saying that often it was because we weren't thinking for ourselves that we became involved with the group. And it may well be that being liberated from the group for the first time, we will begin to think for ourselves. I know,
Right,
some people, um, Aaron Smith Levin said to me, first time I talked with him, that he'd not had an existential crisis when he left Scientology. And the same was true for me. When I came out of Scientology, I went, yippee. I
yeah,
don't have to think along the tram lines that this guy laid down. I can make my own mind up. And that doesn't mean not agreeing with some of the thoughts that other people have had, or having totally or inventing your own language,
right, right,
so that
right,
nobody can understand you. It does mean incorporating those ideas which make sense to you. And in leaving a cult group, um, Christian Churko and I did a thing about this where you should look at how, if you benefited and how you benefited. That's fine too. It's not all black and white
right,
stuff.
right. No, you can't throw the baby out the bathwater. And and I've had people approach me saying, "Oh, would you feel better if some of these people that clearly abused you while you were in the group? Are you hoping to get an apology from them? And and
That'll be the
and
day.
and that's what I've said. I've said, listen, I said, I am not, that is not my objective,
Yeah,
but I said I would welcome it because that would demonstrate potentially that they're starting to think for themselves again.
yeah.
And they would start to have some conscience about what happened and then want to make amends. That is part of the recovery
Mm.
process. Because I certainly know I misbehaved in my group and I was terrible to certain people. And part of my recovery process was addressing that and going to those people and doing the best I could to apologize for my
Mm.
behavior, albeit under the influence, brainwashed, whatever you want to frame it. But I still wanted to be accountable for that behavior and acknowledge it. So I would welcome those apologies, not because I need to hear it because it would really demonstrate potentially they're on the road to recovery, and that's would be great.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. But when Mike Rinder ran harassment for quite a long time in
right,
Scientology, and I was
right,
harassed for quite a long time, and he admitted that the only time we did meet, um, while he was still a member, he would gladly have destroyed me because I
right,
was an obstacle to the road to total freedom that Scientology offers. Um,
right.
Thankfully, he got distracted because I live near Nottingham and he wanted to go and look at Trent Bridge Cricket Ground. So I didn't get destroyed that day. But no, he wouldn't have done anything physically. But he did apologize to me and I did accept his apology. But I rejoiced so much at the thought that somebody who had been put to such terrible use was now
Yeah,
standing up, knowing
exactly.
all of the risks that he was taking, bless him, and able to say, I'm going to do something. So the apology, as you say, it's more useful to the person giving it than the person getting it, perhaps.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah. And
Great.
they
Well,
and they Mike Rinder, rest in peace,
yeah,
God bless him. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. He did so much good in the world. He really
Yeah.
did. I
Yeah.
miss him. Okie dokie.
Good.
We will send, when we put this up, Hoyt, we'll let you know so that you can come and have a look at the comments and
Okay.
um, tell people off for having ridiculous ideas or whatever it is. No, we're
Exactly.
very happy to have questions, comments. Please do contribute, unless you want to say something horrible, in which case, please be polite.
Yeah.
Um, and this has been great. Thanks so much, Hoyt.
Oh,
We'll
good to
see you
see you as
again soon.
always, John. Until the next time, brother.
Yeah.
All the best.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much. We're going to save humanity.
Yes, exactly.